So in this section, we're going to look at linting and formatting our code. So what we're going to look at in this section is linting JavaScript, making sure that, we're following the code style rules we want to follow for our JavaScript, linting CSS, so the same thing but for CSS and Sass, and then auto-formatting JavaScript using Prettier. In this video, we're going to look at some techniques and tools for linting JavaScript, which just makes sure that the JavaScript we've written is of a good standard. So hopefully you're familiar with linting, you might not be. So linting is a technique where you run a program which looks at your source code files and tells you if there are any problems with them, based on some rules that you probably configure. So it basically will help keep your code standardized between your team if you're working in a team. It's a pretty good idea. There's a bunch of ways of doing things in JavaScript, and often it will just enforce that you only use one way of doing something. And it goes from sort of bigger problems like, unused variables or, all doing weird things like if true or other things it thinks you shouldn't do, to really small things like semicolons. So what we've got here is a Webpack code base. It's very similar to all the other ones we've looked at. And what we're going to do is we're going to add some linting to it. So I'm going to show you how to do that. Now, what I'm going to use here to do linting, although there are many different types of tools, is I'm going to use a tool called ESLint, which is just the current linter of choice. It understands, or it can understand, ES6 and 7 code, so it understands the later language features. And there's some really good predefined configs. We're going to be using the Airbnb one, which I think is one of the most popular ones, most widely used. So the first thing I did when I was looking at how to set this up was I went on to the Airbnb config site. So let me just quickly show you that. So here's their site explaining how to set it up, and they've basically explained in here how to set it up. And all I did was copied these instructions. Now, whilst we're here, let me show you about what the Airbnb JavaScript lint is. So they have this great document in GitHub which explains all their rules. So you can see all the different rules they've got. So in types, they basically say what you can and can't do and why, which is really useful because once you're applying the lint, if someone disagrees, you can refer to this document and you can say to them, look, the Airbnb guys think that this is a bad idea because of this, or this is what they've said. It just kind of like decreases the number of arguments you're going to have with any colleagues because you can just refer them back to this document. And obviously these people have spent quite a long time thinking about it. So that's probably a good thing, longer than any one developer probably will have done. So let's run through the instructions that they say. So they have a couple of commands they want you to run. I'll paste them in. You're going to save most of these dependencies as dev dependencies because, linting's not a thing that actually happens when you run your code in production, right? It's a thing that happens like behind the scenes when you're checking your code and building your code. So now those dependencies have installed, and we've got a bunch more dependencies in here. We've already got quite a lot, but you can see like ESLint. So now we need to set up the config for the project. So in the main directory for the project, I'm going to create a new file called .eslintrc.yaml. Now you can create a .json file. I think you can also create it without the .yaml. All of that will be on ESLint's website. I personally prefer YAML. I think it's just a bit more concise, but it doesn't really matter. So you create that file, and I'm going to just add the Airbnb stuff into it. So this is all from the Airbnb website. You're extending Airbnb. I've gone with the React one because that's what I normally use, but I don't think you have to use it with React. And there's like some extra plugins in here that we're using. So the next thing is to try and use ESLint to actually lint our code. So if we switch back to the command line, we can grab ESLint because it's in node modules.bin because ESLint is the kind of thing that runs on the command line. So we can just run ESLint. Okay, we need to pass some arguments. So I think maybe you just say, let's try that. So just pass in the source. Okay, great. So you can see here, let me run it again for you. We ran ESLint against the source folder where all our JavaScript is, and it did find a warning, but no errors. Great. There wasn't a lot of code in this project, so that's not surprising. In fact, there's only one line. So here's what we're going to do now. I'm going to paste in a function I wrote earlier. Fun is the name of the function. And here you've got some parameters, X, Y, and Z. We've not used Z, and we've said if true, blah, blah, blah. So which is kind of an anti-pattern. So let's see what happens now when we lint our code. Okay, now we get like a whole load of warnings where it's like, what are you doing? So this is how linting works. It gives you lots of nice errors and says, look, on line 3, function is assigned a value but it's never used. You're missing a space after the comma. So let's fix some of this stuff up. So it's saying we're missing the spaces. It's probably going to say that we never used X, Y, and Z. Let me just fix those ones. Let's see. So now you can see we've got a few less errors. We're missing a semicolon. So that's great. So that's how linting works. Now, obviously, at the moment, I'm running it from the node modules folder. What you'd probably do is add a script. So you can run npm run lint or something, and it will just run ESLint source, just this bit. You don't need this if you're doing it in scripts, if you remember from the first part. Yeah, so you'd probably have that so your teammates can like run the lint as well, and then you would probably run this command as part of your build. Like your Circle CI or whatever it is you use for continuous integration, you'd run it there. What I'm going to do now is show you, obviously we've got some rules and most of them are the Airbnb. So there's one rule here which perhaps you might disagree with. So let's say I don't really like having semicolons. So how can we turn off this? So this warning here is like, oh, you've not used a semicolon. I actually prefer to not have semicolons. So how do we change the rules to allow for that? So ESLint's very configurable, which can be seen as a good thing and a bad thing, but you can tweak the rules in your config. So here I'm going to say all of this is covered on their site. Now you get a different error, but you get another error, which was extra semicolon, because there was a semicolon somewhere. So you can change the rules. There's a ton of rules. If you Google it, if you look at the ESLint rules, there's all sorts of things you can change to get it just how you want it. Yeah, and it's really easy, and that's it. And then it will just look at all your files like that. And obviously you should try and have no lint errors, and you can build it into your continuous integration flow. I find this like really important when working with JavaScript, and we don't work on any projects that don't have them. They're especially important when you're working with a team, but I think they help keep you honest as well, even if you're working individually. So if you're working on a proper project where code quality is important, then you should definitely have a lint. There's almost no doubt in my mind, it's just a bit of a no-brainer.